Welcome to HurricaneCenterLive.com. I'm Alex Garcia, Director of the National Tropical Weather Conference and Executive Producer of these programs. These programs are made possible by USAA, the South Padre Island Convention and Tourist Bureau, and Plylock's Hurricane Clips. These programs are also a team effort with Bill Reed, the former Director of the National Hurricane Center, and Tim Smith, Chief Meteorologist of KRGV-TV. And now, here's Tim Smith.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to NTWC Live for Wednesday, November the 18th. We are glad to have you along with us today for what I think is going to be another great program. Anytime Josh is on, it's a great program, so we know it's going to be a lot of fun. So looking forward to a nice conversation with Josh Morgerman about what this hurricane season has been, and it's almost over. It's almost, we just get over the hump here. We'll be done. We want to thank all of our sponsors who are part of the program, as always. USAA, part of a lot of the programs we do at the Storm Science Network, and we appreciate everything USAA does for Storm Science Network and the National Tropical Weather Conference. We appreciate that. The South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, the host of the National Tropical Weather Conference, all virtual this year. We've been out there a lot and hope to be back in April of 2021, back at the Marriott Courtyard on South Padre Island. We're hoping for things to go well so we can be back out there live. And also thanks to Plylocks. These little clips right here that people put on their plywood, put it in the windows to stay safe during a storm. They've been very helpful the last year with the National Tropical Weather Conference. We appreciate Plylocks for all you do. In fact, let's take a look at a message from Plylocks right now, and then we'll get on to the program.
Plylock's window clips are patented 8-shaped carbon or stainless steel clips engineered to fit 1/2, 5/8, or 3/4 inch plywood without nails, screws, or adhesives. Designed to fit in the 2.5-inch window inset of your brick, wood, or stucco home. They are installed in seconds, and they are an inexpensive, non-destructive way to protect your windows from high winds and airborne debris. To install, first measure each window casing and subtract 1/4 inch off the length and width measurement, leaving a 1/8 inch clearance all the way around. Next, cut your plywood to the recorded measurements. Make sure the clips fit snugly on the plywood. If needed, squeeze the Plylocks clips with your fingers for a tighter fit. If the window is 24 inches by 24 inches or smaller, only 2 Plylocks clips are needed on each vertical side. Excluded from this rule are circular, arched, or octagonal windows. Each clip should be placed on the plywood cover no more than 24 inches apart. Make sure the tension legs are facing towards you. Push the plywood covers with the Plylocks tension legs to the outside firmly into the casing. For larger windows or sliding glass doors, seam the plywood if needed and use additional Plylocks clips spaced no more than 24 inches apart. For more direction on larger window installation, please visit our website. To remove, just release tension from behind the clip by putting your finger behind the tension leg and pulling towards you. Work the Plylocks clips on one side of the plywood sheet. Remove the Plylocks clips from the plywood and store in a dry place. Lock in protection with Plylocks.
Great folks at Plylocks. They make those little clips just like you see. They have a little demo board right here. They have to be careful when they put it down because these guys do lock into your bricks and they're sharp. So let's put that over there. Keep it safe. So thanks to Plylocks and all our sponsors for making this possible. All right, let's get to it. Let's start with Bill to give us an update on what's happening today, and then Bill will introduce our guest. Here he is, the former director of the National Hurricane Center, Mr. Bill Reed. Good morning, Bill.
Morning, Tim. Yeah, we had unbelievable record strong storm in Iota shortly making landfall about the same place that Ada, which was also a record late forming landfalling major hurricane for Nicaragua, and they've never had anything quite like what's happened there now. And I'm sure the same village is being hit twice. The catastrophic damage reports will keep coming in. So for today, okay. Hopefully, you see that okay, Tim?
Got it.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
This is the latest outlook for the tropical Atlantic from the National Hurricane Center. Iota is now a remnant low, getting ready to move out in the Pacific, and probably that's all we'll hear about it. This hotspot of the Southwest Caribbean was looking like on the models of something might spin up there. They're not as rigorous with it anymore, but we're still holding a 20% probability of potential development down there. And new to the outlook is a chance of a disturbance forming and maybe becoming a subtropical system, but it's probably beyond this forecast period right now when that'll happen. Over in the Eastern Pacific, this is pretty late in the year for them also. We have newly named Tropical Storm Polo out here in the Eastern Pacific, and it's not expected to last too long. In fact, by this time tomorrow, it should be transitioning into from a weak tropical storm into a depression, and then a remnant low as it enters some more hostile conditions out in the open Pacific. There we go. On the satellite, interesting, there's a lot of convection firing up down here in the hot spot once again, and surface obs indicate there's sort of a broad low feature down in there, but nothing well defined at this time, but it's something we'll keep our eyes on going forward. And then here's Polo out in the East Pacific. It developed a nice ball of convection overnight near the center. And again, it's expected to enter hostile conditions going westward into the open Pacific Ocean. Okay, back with us today is our infamous storm chaser, Mr. Josh Morgerman. Josh normally originates from Los Angeles, and we're going to talk a little bit about the logistics of how he worked this season. And it's kind of fortuitous that he had to come to Mississippi, I think, given all the activity we had in there. And hopefully we'll be able to meet live at our meeting in April and be regaled with the productions of your chases there. So welcome, Josh. You did things different this hurricane season. You set up in Mississippi. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Yeah, God, what a year to set up here. I mean, I could not have anticipated that this would have been out of like 170 years of documented hurricane seasons, that this would be the best one to set up on the Gulf Coast. But the genesis of the idea was basically it was COVID. I was, like a lot of people, just kind of in lockdown in LA all winter and was just, or a spring, I should say, and was realizing that, hey, I'm basically going to be stuck in North America the entire hurricane season, which, was going to radically change things for me because I'm a global chaser. I chase every hemisphere. And actually the last decade, a lot of my chasing has been outside of the United States and mostly in East Asia. I've had whole seasons where basically everything I chased were typhoons in Western Pacific. So with those countries closed down, with air travel just kind of basically shut down, I'm like, all right, if I'm going to be stuck in the US, how am I going to do this? The other thing was I didn't want to get on planes, it just didn't seem like a good idea. So I was like, all right, why don't I just do things different this year and headquarter in the heart of the USA's hurricane country so that I could just road trip to everything, take airplanes out of the equation, take my passport out of the equation. So I looked at a map and I'm like, all right, so I want to be somewhere where I can get to South Texas, South Florida, and the Eastern Carolinas with sort of equal speed in a car. And that midpoint is Mississippi. So it was as simple as that. So it was basically, initially, it was a purely geographical decision. It was like, all right, this is a good midpoint. And so I just hunted around for a house to rent and happened upon a really nice one here in Bay St. Louis, a house that has very cool history, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But that's how I ended up here. Actually, now I having lived here now for so many months, I've really grown to love Mississippi, and also specifically Bay St. Louis, where I am now. So now it's not so much a random sort of geographical midpoint now, as much as it is a place that's kind of grown on me quite a bit.
You think you might go back there in future seasons, regardless of the pandemic issues?
Yeah, that is actually the plan. Folks have been asking me about that. And actually my plan is to come back next July to do it this way again. I really, being a chaser the way I do it, where I'm really hardcore, I'm like on the road, or I should say in the air constantly, over the course of a hurricane, chase after chase. I mean, a typical year now, I chase 8 to 10 hurricanes, and some of those are huge multinational expeditions. And, it's like a professional athlete, you kind of, you deal with burnout, after years and years of doing it. And it's just like what you see with athletes, you're really hot on your game for a long time. And then you just start to, it's just burnout is the only way I could describe it. It's exhausting. And doing it different this year, mixing it up where I'm living in hurricane country, and, every chase is a road trip. I'm just in the car and just driving. And I love driving. I'm one of these people, I like it. I live in LA, and people are like, oh, LA has traffic. Like a lot of smart Angelinos, I've designed my life where I don't deal with traffic in my whole, I actually live in a part of LA where I could walk to everything and all that. So I love driving and sort of road tripping this year, and kind of mostly taking airports out of the equation, and just the drag of airports, taking that out of the equation has made it kind of fun for me again. I feel like I kind of had a little bit of a renaissance this year with my chasing. And I thought to myself, next summer, with these vaccines and everything, it looks like, wow, we might be back to normal, which I'm really excited about. We all miss our old lives, right? But I'm thinking I want to do it this way again next year, station here in the Gulf and chase internationally again. I've been looking at it. I live in Bay St. Louis, which is near New Orleans. That's the closest major airport. It's just about an hour away. And, I can still get out to the Western Pacific and chase typhoons from here. It's an extra step. LA was really easy in that way because, from LA, you could fly just nonstop to Tokyo, to Manila, to Taipei. From New Orleans, that's going to be an extra step. But I'm thinking that's how I want to do it this year. I really enjoyed the experience of not just hunting the hurricanes, but living in hurricane zone and experiencing it as a resident, as a Gulf Coast resident who's just looking out in the Gulf every day and wondering what it's going to send our way. It's been really interesting.
Very cool. So what's it like being a transplanted New Yorker, LA dude, living in southern Mississippi on the coast?
It's been like a culture shock, but fun culture shock. I'm an adventurer at heart, and I love being anywhere that I'm not familiar with and that I haven't been. I lived in Europe for many years, in Eastern Europe, and I like that because it was really different. And in some ways, living in southern Mississippi, coastal Mississippi, it was in a lot of ways it was like moving to a foreign country. It was like almost like, wait, do I need my passport here? And but that's what made it fun. That's what, especially after months of just living in lockdown in LA. I've always been a big traveler, and leading up to this summer, it's just months and months of just no travel, just like all of us, just kind of stuck in one place. And I was just having this wanderlust, like, my God, I just need to get somewhere else. And so driving across the country and then setting up in this house in this town that I didn't really know very well was just awesome. And I'll tell you, I've been a city guy my whole life. I grew up in New York, suburban New York. And, I've lived, my whole adult life in LA. I went to college in Boston. This is the first time I lived in a small town. And man, I'll tell you, there's a lot of things that I really dig about it. I especially love Bay St. Louis. I mean, it's really like, it's I feel like it's my home now. When I come back here, I'm definitely coming back to Bay St. Louis. But, it's this cool little town right on the Gulf, and the downtown area is right on the Gulf, which is cool. And it's all these like really awesome old houses, and it's this really cool architecture that we don't have in California. It's really different, like the porches. It's just to me, it's really beautiful. I really like it. And the pace of life is obviously different in a way that I find really kind of refreshing. As a city guy, I noticed that I had this kind of go mentality about everything. Even when I'm driving, I wouldn't say I'm aggressive, but even like when I'm in LA and I'm driving, it's like I'm always like looking for that opening to just get around the car in front of me. And when I got here, I realized like that's just not how it is here. It's just totally, people relax, everyone stops at stop signs. It's just, there's like you're walking up to like, the doorway of the coffee shop, and the other person like lets you go before them. And it's like, and it kind of changed me, I've kind of rewired a little bit, and it's nice. I've just kind of sort of slow down, taking a breath, been a little more present in the moment. It's been a really good thing for me in that sense. It's just, I found it kind of very refreshing, and people here are really nice. I run a lot, and people, they're sitting on their porches and, people you don't know, and they just, they wave to you when you go by. Like people just like wave and say hi, people that you don't know. And that's nice. I think that's really neighborly. So yeah, I definitely I dig the vibe here. It's really cool.
Cool. Did anyone yell "Run, Forrest, run" as you ran by?
No sassy remarks, just supportive waves.
Cool. I was spent a lot of time looking around that part of the coast after Katrina, mostly to see how bad the damage was and what maybe had been done different. You said it's an older house and it managed to not get wiped out by either Camille or Katrina. What's the deal with its location, given everything else got whacked?
Yeah, this house, I'm also not just a chaser, but I'm a total history nerd, and folks who follow me on Twitter know that when I'm not chasing, I'm making cool infographics about historic storms. I love history. History is what I studied in college, and I love hurricane history. And that also made Bay St. Louis really exciting to me. So when I was growing up as this really harsh weather nerd teenager, thank God there was not Twitter when I was a teenager, because I would have been the most annoying 15-year-old in the history of social media. Oh my God. The world should be grateful there was not Twitter when I was a teenager. But, I remember when I was growing up reading about the great hurricanes of the past. And of course, Camille, this was before Andrew and Katrina. Camille was the benchmark, it was the greatest American hurricane. And, I remember reading the accounts, Bay St. Louis always came up because the eye, it made landfall in Waveland, which is the town next to us. And the eye passed over Bay St. Louis. And so Bay St. Louis, as this kid in New York, it was this dot on the map that had kind of sort of mythical, significance to me as, just like, wow, the eye of a Cat 5 passed over that town. That's cool. So it's fun to then live here. And this house in particular, the house that you're looking at right behind you, Hurricane House, is probably about 90 years old. And I talked to the owner a lot about the house because I was just really into the history. His son actually renovated it with his own two hands and did a really cool job. It's like a beautifully renovated house, but it's old. And the bones of this house are really strong. So this house has been through the 1947 hurricane, which devastated the Mississippi coast. The center actually stayed offshore and went into Louisiana, but the right side of it just blasted the Mississippi coast with tremendous storm surge. And then, of course, Camille, 150 knot or 175 mile an hour hurricane. The eye passed right over this house here, and the house stayed up. And then Katrina, the owner told me that the storm surge came up to the porch steps and stopped. And, this house has just been through and survived it all. And as a lot of your listeners or viewers probably know, Katrina made landfall that the exact center of it crossed the coast right at the Mississippi-Louisiana border, near Slidell. So what that meant was that St. Louis Bay and Bay St. Louis and Pass Christian were in that right eye wall and had the maximum storm surge. So the maximum storm surge was focused right here, basically in St. Louis Bay. And it's, as far as I know, the highest storm surge in American history. It was pushing 30 feet. So the storm surge destruction in this town and neighboring Waveland and Pass Christian and Long Beach and all the way out to Gulfport, because, it was a big hurricane with a big core. The storm surge damage here was just off the charts. And in fact, much of the Bay St. Louis downtown has had to be rebuilt because the destruction was so massive. But that said, a lot of the houses in this town, these are old houses that have survived all these storms. They don't build them like they used to. This one in particular, this house, folks see pictures of the hurricane, my hurricane house, as I call it, from the outside. And it looks like this cute little house. It doesn't look like it, you don't realize how sturdy this thing is. But the owner's son who renovated it said, when he looked inside these walls, this is one of these solid old houses. This thing is made real sturdy. Obviously, if it survived Camille and Katrina and all these storms, and it's still here, you can trust it.
Well, I'd like to reincarnate the guy who designed it, because he was way ahead of his times. If you look at it now, that's very interesting. Switching a little bit to the season now, from your perspective, we've all been engrossed in the massive numbers of storms we had. What, from your perspective, what made this season unique for you?
Well, obviously, living here, in the hurricane zone to experience it, and road tripping to every storm. That made it unique personally. In terms of U.S. impacts, as you guys know, but I'll just say for viewers that don't, this year tied 1886 and 1985 for the most hurricane landfalls in the continental United States. So there were six times a hurricane center crossed the American coastline. And like I said, that's only happened 2 other times in records going back to 1851. It happened in 1886 and it happened in 1985. So that was unique. But then even more crazy, the activity was super Gulf centric. You find that, the one thing, when we look at like historic hurricane tracks, like I told you, I'm a history nerd. And again, as you guys know, this hurricane tracks or activity tends to cluster in certain areas. So certain years or certain groups of years will have a lot of impacts in the same place. Like for example, in the 1940s, the late 1940s, like right after the war, Florida just got smashed again and again. 1945 to 1950, Florida just got all these Category 4 hurricanes. It was nuts. And ones that hit like Miami and Fort Lauderdale. Then in the 1950s, it was the East Coast. Everything went up the East Coast and smashed the population centers in the Northeast. My mother remembers as a teenager in New York City, she just was like, oh my God, when I was a teenager, we were getting hurricanes all the time. And she was right. They were all going up the coast. 60s was more of like a Gulf decade and so on. This year, 2020 was just super, from South Texas all the way to the Florida Panhandle. The only area that looks like it kind of got off easy, you could say, is the Florida Peninsula, but the rest of the Gulf Coast just got raked.
Yeah, there's a graphic going around where someone highlighted a map of the eastern U.S. with all the counties on it, and all the counties that had warnings or watches in there. And oddly enough, there was only a couple of counties that never went under a warning, centered around Tallahassee up in the Big Bend of Florida.
Oh, wow.
Otherwise, all the way from Maine to Brownsville, we've had impacts. So didn't you hit any important milestones this year in terms of how many hurricanes you've been in?
Yeah, this really, I keep track of my my chasing, my stats. Like I said, I've always thought of it like a sport, and I'm really into my stats. And so I reached a big milestone. I hit 50 hurricane eye walls this year. So 50 times that I've been in the core or the eye wall of a hurricane strength system. And then I blew past that milestone. So now I'm up to 55. And I've been in and now 38 hurricane eyes. So those are some kind of exciting milestones to hit. I did not expect with the pandemic that I'd just kind of increase my numbers so much this year. It was just incredible. I mean, of all the years for me to be just basically trapped in North America, it's just incredible that all the activity basically just came to me. It was really nuts.
Wow. Why don't we go through some of the storms and what made them unique, and Tim or Alex jump in on ones that particularly interest you if you got a question to add to what we're chatting about here. So what about Hannah? That's one of Tim's favorites.
Yeah, so Hannah, so that was, I just got into Mississippi. I got here, I think on July 11th or something, and I had just settled in, and was wondering if there might be some early season action, and then there was, and Hannah, I remember initially I was not too bullish about it. I did not think it was going to be a hurricane, but it was an example of the sort of, for me as a chaser, the advantage of living down here on the Gulf Coast was, well, I didn't have to be sure that it was going to be a hurricane. I didn't have to make a decision to go fly somewhere. I'm like, well, I'll just get in the car and I'll drive. And if it's not a hurricane, okay, I just, I wasted some gas, not the end of the world. It was a long drive, because it wasn't just in Texas, it was in South Texas, which is, the U.S. Gulf Coast is pretty long. And I had to go, almost to the Mexican border to hunt this thing down. But yeah, Hannah really came together and was surprising. Folks always ask me, I've been in 5 Category 5 hurricanes. I've been in, more than a dozen Category 4 and 5 combined. I've been in like the worst of the worst. I've been in the strongest landfalling hurricane in the Atlantic, in the Eastern Pacific, and in the Western Pacific. In all those, I've been in the strongest landfalling storm. So people ask me, do you get bored with Cat 1s? I'm like, no, man, a hurricane's a hurricane. And Hannah actually that thing had a surprising kick to it. It just reminded me, every hurricane is a big deal. When I got down to Port Mansfield and that place was getting raked by that Category 1 eye wall, it had that awesome power, that all hurricanes have. I talked to less experienced chasers and they're like, hey, I'm not going to go for that. That's a Cat 1. I'm like, huh? I'm like, what? You're too good for a Cat 1? I'm not. And Hannah was a good reminder that the thing had some real power, and the drive back afterward, back up to Kingsville, where I was staying, was really quite treacherous. But that thing had a real kick. Port Mansfield got blasted by it. Fortunately, it looks like town got through okay. Little did I realize that first storm of the season was just a tiny appetizer what was going to come.
So that was your focus point, was Port Mansfield, or did you try any of the other? There's not a whole lot of access to the waterfronts down there.
Yeah, like South Texas, that as you guys know, I'm talking to a bunch of Texans right now. You guys know that better than anyone, that kind of zone between Corpus Christi and Brownsville, there's just not a lot there, and it's hard to find a good spot. My initial target for Hannah was Riviera Beach in Baffin Bay, and I thought that was going to be perfect. And actually, I had a place like literally right on the water, and it was going to be on the right side of the hurricane as it came ashore, so there's going to be onshore flow. So I'm like, wow, this will be really dramatic. I'll get a good shot of the storm surge. Had the car on high ground. Everything was perfect. But the hurricane actually just really kept dipping south, and I looked like the eye wall just barely. It looked like it was gonna. I think it actually missed that area, but I really wanted to get the center. So at the last second, I bailed and went further south, and that was a hard decision. I get this thing, and I notice other chasers get it. I call it chaser dude inertia, where late in a chase, you pick a location and it's like a sexy location. It's perfect. It's like right on the waterfront. You got these amazing views that it's just like, it's like chaser dude's dream. It's exactly what you want. And then the hurricane moves or it goes somewhere else. And you're so in love with the location that you're like, all right, I'm going to stay here anyway. You can't, it's like your feet feel like they're cement blocks. Like you don't want to move because the location's so awesome. And one of the things as a chaser I've had to learn how to do is break that inertia and just be like, okay, yeah, this is a really cool location, but if you stay here, you're going to miss the storm. So I just managed to, you just tear yourself away. You get in that car, you keep hunting. So I went down Highway 77, and as you know, there's like basically no access to the water for like quite a ways. And then basically the next good opportunity to really be close to the action was Port Mansfield. And actually the eye ended up passing over Port Mansfield. We were in the comm for a while, so it ended up being the right location. Yeah, that storm really, it just dipped further south than I expected at the very last second. But, I was able to relocate. I love chasing in Texas. In terms of the United States, Texas is probably my favorite turf. It's very chaseable. The highways are really good. You can really get around. You can maneuver easily and get in good locations. So I really dig chasing in Texas. That said, the area between Corpus and Brownsville is a little bit of a black hole. It can be challenging, especially when you get down to Kennedy County. It's just like, you're going to ride out the storm with a couple of cows. It's like,
yeah, I think Tim is always saying that when you reach Raymondville, you need a passport.
Either direct. That's true, Bill. And and Josh, the unique thing about that storm too was that if you were on the south side of it, that's where all the action was, because the north side, it was a backward storm. That right front quadrant was not very active. The south side was the active side.
Yeah, that's a great point. When I was looking at the radar afterward, I was noticing that it had that. It was like you said, it was like kind of a through the looking glass storm where where the wrong side was strong. And what's interesting is one of the great hurricanes of South Texas, Celia, of 1970 was the same way. It was really interesting. We all think of, and a lot of chasers have it in their head that the right front quad is always the strongest part. But Hurricane Celia of 1970, which absolutely devastated Corpus Christi, was another one of those backward storms. It was moving west, and the south eye wall passed over Corpus. You guys know this again. I'm just saying it for the viewers, but the south eye wall passed over Corpus Christi, and that was the intense part. And there was also some weird microburst action or something going on, but that south eye wall was just very convective and intense, and it blasted the city full on with gusts over 160 miles an hour. I mean, that thing was a monster. And if you look at the radar shots, and yeah, there was radar back then, not as nice and colorful as we have now, but there's radar. But when you look at the radar shots of Celia, it really looked backwards. There was that really robust south eye wall, and the northern part up near Aransas Pass looked kind of like broken and not really, it was really a very lopsided storm, but the part of it that had bite had serious bite.
Very cool. Well, then you had Isaias, and I would describe following your adventure on that as kind of a real-time Where's Waldo thing.
That chase was like, I found it I found it embarrassing. I felt like the butt of a joke chasing that thing. I mean, I really literally, I felt like it was like undignified that I was hunting down this piece of junk, you know, to the far corners of the earth. I literally was like, this is undignified. This is beneath you. So I drove and drove and drove from Mississippi down to South Florida. And, you know, whether it was going to hit South Florida as a hurricane or not, or even hit was iffy. But I decided, again, I'm like, hey, I'm down here to chase. I'm just going to go after everything. So I just was like, I'll just go for it. And of course, not only it not only weakened below hurricane strength, but it missed South Florida. So I drove all the way down there basically for nothing. And it was the first bust that I'd had in years where I'd gone for a hurricane and just, you know, like missed it. But then there was sort of what I call the resurrection. I realized, you know, as it was going up the coast, wait, there's an opportunity here. It might actually hit the Carolinas as a hurricane. And I think that the models were mixed at that point. But I decided, you know, I was on the fence about it because I felt like I already got burned by this storm once and I didn't want to embarrass myself anymore. And I think I remember thinking to myself, all right, I'm going to be secretive. I'm not going to share on social media that I'm going to the Carolinas to chase it. I'm not going to tell anyone because I'm too embarrassed. But if it ends up being a hurricane, then I'll just make a dramatic reveal and say, hey, I'm here. I'm in it. But I ended up just spilling the beans anyway. But I did go up to the Carolinas and it, you know, it was the start of the pattern this year. Actually, Hannah was the start of the pattern of storms kind of exploding right before landfall. You know, Hannah did it. It looked kind of like garbage. And then it just suddenly looked really like a nice hurricane as it came in. And Isaias was the same way. You know, it really looked like garbage its entire life until it got near the South Carolina coast. And all of a sudden, man, it just came together. And so that was, I call that chase kind of sliding into home plate because, you know, I was driving. And then I got up to the Carolinas and just managed to punch that one in time. But yeah, it was surprising how that one came together. And it was another kind of asymmetric storm where the right side of it, you know, that hit kind of the Wilmington area, North Carolina, and the communities below it, like Wrightsville Beach. That was really the strong part. And I wasn't in that part, but I got right in the center of the eye. I didn't get amazing footage in that one, but it was not a bust. I got inside of it and I ended up saving it. So I felt good in that sense to continue my bust-less streak, which has been going since 2016.
Now, did you position yourself on Oak Island for that landfall, or were you further east?
I was in Ocean Isle Beach, if I'm saying the name of the community correctly. I was right exactly where the landfall point was. I did not get out on the islands, which would have been really cool, but I was just running behind that whole chase. It was not one of my better chases, but I got basically right where it came ashore. But the real action for that one was not right at the landfall point. It really was east of the landfall point. Although Myrtle Beach and North Myrtle Beach for a while, and there was some serious storm surge happening there. Even though they were left of the center, there was like a lot of water coming in, and it's just a reminder, man. And you know, I'll talk about this more as we go on. But you know, the U.S., so much of the U.S. coastline, the Gulf Coast, and also the Southeast, is just so vulnerable to storm surge more than in other countries. Just our continental, the slope of the continental shelf, and just our coastline, the way it is uniquely vulnerable. And you just see that even in a Category 1 hurricane, you get this just massive storm surge inundation.
Yeah, and our wealth betrays us because it allows us to build fancy properties right up to the water's edge, which doesn't happen in a lot of the world. So that the impacts become worse, even though the storm surge can happen just as bad in other places. Cool. Well, the big one that came closest to me was Laura. Did you manage to get into Laura somewhere in Lake Charles area?
Yeah, so Laura was, of course, I would call it the big headline of the season. Very intense Category 4 hurricane striking the U.S. and unfortunately impacting some pretty large population centers. Laura was a tough chase. I love the state of Louisiana. I mean, I love New Orleans. I love the Bayou country. I love all those cool towns down there where people have those like interesting accents. I love everything about Louisiana except chasing hurricanes there. It is the most, every time when I'm getting ready for a chase and it looks like Louisiana, I'm always like, oh, Louisiana is very, 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 very challenging from a chase perspective. It's super flat. Basically, the southern third of the state is just all swamp, 6 inches above sea level. So you could be 20, 25 miles inland and you're still vulnerable to storage. So it makes chasing really vulnerable. Like I've chased in part Taiwan and Japan where it's the exact opposite. Like there are areas of Taiwan and Japan where when you're chasing, you're not even thinking about storm surge. It's not even a factor because they're these islands and they have like major hills right at the coast. It's like you want to get away from the storm surge, just go 20 feet, literally 20 feet inland. It's just like it's hills. Like there's nothing to worry about. You don't even think about storm surge. In Louisiana, it's all you think about. And it makes it really hard when you have an intense hurricane, one like Laura, like a serious heavy duty hurricane coming in. You just can't get down there right on the coast and chase it. Well, you can't if you want to, get out in one piece and not lose your car and all that, So with Louisiana hurricane a lot of the time, and with this one, you kind of have to be a little further inland you want to be. So basically, I was trying to figure out, okay, where along the stretch I want to be. And I think initially I was planning on being in Orange, Texas. It looked like it was going to come right at the border. But then that night I realized when I was looking at the radar, okay, it looks more, I got to go east. I wanted to punch the exact center. So I ended up in Sulphur, Louisiana, which is the town next to Lake Charles. It's just west of Lake Charles. And that ended up, in terms of getting in the center, that ended up being like the perfect bullseye, the actual exact center of that hurricane passed over Sulphur. Now, Laura was a structurally, that thing was a freak show. There was something weird about that hurricane. Usually the stronger hurricane, the more sort of conventional the structure. I've known storms that are not well formed, weakening, the structure starts to get all weird. You find odd features about it. But usually with really strong hurricanes, this was a 150 mile an hour hurricane, everything is very kind of textbook and it's put together in this like very sort of regular and classic way. So the weird thing about Laura was that the precipitation eye and the wind eye were different. So everyone noticed this, and people in Lake Charles noticed it, and I noticed it in Sulphur. You're in the eye wall and you're getting like the crazy, the really crazy winds and the heavy rain and just the eye wall action. And then the rain just stopped, and the radar showed it too. The radar said I was well into the eye and it was not raining, but the winds were still raging at like well over hurricane force. And that went on for a while. Now I've been in a lot of hurricanes where the transition from the eye wall into the eye, you might get a sudden blast of wind, but this was not that. This was like you were well into the eye and you were still getting really intense winds. And some folks are saying, oh, that's just because the Lake Charles radar was down, so we're having to use Houston radar, and it was some kind of displacement. And I'm like, no, this was not a displacement thing. This was like, there was something weird about this hurricane. And I talked to some of the hurricane hunter guys, and they said that they noticed it too in their recon missions, that there was just something very weird about this hurricane, that you got so far into the eye, the precipitation eye, and the wind was still destructive. But finally, when I got into the exact middle of the radar eye, then I got a calm. Then I got like a dead calm, but it was only in the really kind of very middle part of that eye. And that's also where I had my minimum pressure. my friends, my fellow chaser dudes in Lake Charles, that's where most of the guys were. They never got that calm. They were in the eye, but they were still getting, like they described it as 100-mile-an-hour winds the entire time they were in the eye, and they never got the calm. The calm was only over Sulphur because Sulphur went through the exact middle. So that was just, that was a very weird thing about that hurricane that I never experienced before. Quite an impact. The wind damage in Sulphur and Lake Charles was massive. You know, a lot of people said, "Oh, the Hurricane Center over forecasted." It made people they overstated the storm surge threat. And that's actually not correct. You know, they went in afterward and they found that the storm surge was really high. I think it went over 17 feet. It was a fortunate turn of events where it came ashore. I shouldn't say that it was fortunate. Obviously it wasn't, but if it had come, it came ashore basically like right where Spur and Lake Charles are. So those towns were in the center, meaning that the maximum storm surge was actually east of those. If the hurricane had come a little further west, you know, let's say right at the Texas-Louisiana border, and Lake Charles and Sulphur had been right at the center, that massive storm surge would have penetrated inland and hit those towns, and it would have been a much different story. The hurricane was dating enough, but had it come ashore a little further west, we would have been talking a whole other level of devastation.
Wow. That Sally was probably one of the storms I was most interested in, I guess, because I keep looking at heavy rainfall events, and it fit the classic pattern for the storms that give you more than 25 inches of rain. Did you flood it all while you were chasing Sally?
That was the big concern, I remember, because that thing, the forward motion, it was agonizing as it came ashore. It just, my God, it moved so slowly. It just drove you crazy. And that was the big concern, was the rainfall. And that was going to be, I remember the biblical flooding was going to be the headline, but I think the headline with Sally ended up being what happened right as it came ashore. I mean, I remember I was, you know, I got to Alabama where it looked like it was going to come in, and all day long, the thing looked like total garbage on radar. I didn't think it was even going to come in as a hurricane. It was just having issues. I mean, it looked like scrambled eggs on radar. I'm like, this thing is not a hurricane. It can't be. And basically, you know, my kind of, I noticed there's sort of a sliding scale. The weaker the hurricane, the more aggressive I am about chasing it. You know, like if it's I'll take more chances. I'll be more kind of, just more aggressive, you know, if I think the hurricane isn't that strong, because I'm just, you know, I'm trying to make it interesting. And I was treating Sally that way. And then what happened in the final hours, and I mean the final hours, the thing just exploded. It just came together, and, you know, it came ashore not just as a hurricane, but it was pushing Category 3 as it came ashore. The thing just really like revved up as it was coming ashore. And something I've noticed, you know, hurricanes that are on the upswing, that are strengthening, seem to have more of an angry edge than ones that are weakening. So if you take like a 90-knot hurricane, 105-mile-an-hour hurricane, I know not to talk knots when I'm talking like in mainstream discussions, but you take a 100-mile-an-hour hurricane, if it's on the upswing, if it's like intensifying, it just seems to have more of an angry edge than one that's, you know, 100 miles an hour but weakening. And so Sally came in at Gulf Shores, Alabama, you know, as a strengthening, very strong Category 2 hurricane, pushing Category 3. And I was just, you know, by the time I realized how strong it was, I was it was too late to take cover. I was in my car on the beach boulevard in Gulf Shores, just getting raked, and that thing really surprised me. I was not expecting such an intense hurricane. That thing really had an edge. It was something. Amazingly, it was another nighttime landfall. But the cool thing is, I don't know, Gulf Shores, Alabama, like I want to give praise to their whoever like handles the power grid there, because the electricity stayed on almost to the eye. So even as a nighttime landfall, the lights were on and you could see what was happening. And I got some good footage in that one. So I was really impressed with how well the grid stayed up, and it made it so that even though it was a nighttime landfall, I felt like I could really document it. And that was cool.
Wow. Amazing storm.
Yeah.
Then we delve into the Greek alphabet. You're multilingual. Do you speak Greek?
No, this has actually been really educational. You know, I feel like the late part of the season is almost like it's like the Sesame Street of the Greek alphabet. It's like, you know, teaching you a letter at a time, and, you know, you're learning them in order. Yeah, no, it's been really, I actually didn't know the Greek alphabet past like the first 3 letters. And now, man, we're learning like a lot of it.
Yeah, I was going into flashbacks to nightmares of differential equations and using.
That's why I never became a meteorologist. It was that stuff. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna be a chaser, dude, because I don't want to do that math.
It was something else, but then I remember following Delta with dismay because it looked like it was going to be really bad for the place another place that had already been hit. A theme that's happened this year in Louisiana. So you went back to Lake Charles, did you, for Delta?
Well, Delta was a double whammy for me. So even though I said, you know, because of the pandemic, I don't want to fly, I ended up breaking my rule, and I decided to hunt down Delta on the Yucatan, and the reason was, you know, climatology drives a lot of my decisions. And there's one thing I know, it's that October hurricanes on the Yucatan can just be nuclear grade. You know, that's like where the real stuff happens, you know, just like that, like the East coast of the Yucatan, October, man, it's like the Philippines. It's like, you can expect crazy stuff to happen. So the impact of Delta on the U.S. Gulf Coast was not like, it was unclear what was going to happen, but it looked like the Yucatan impact was going to be big. So I drove to New Orleans and took an overnight flight and went down to the Yucatan and hunted it there. Now it weakened a little, which is unusual. It was actually kind of not what I expected. It came ashore right now. They estimate it was a very strong Category 2, almost Category 3, but it was quite destructive. The center of it came ashore pretty close to Cancun, and even though the storm had been on a weakening trend, Cancun got absolutely raked. There was a lot of wind damage. Palm trees snapped off, facades of buildings collapsed. I mean, it really was like a mess. And I mean, the place was really banged up. And then I realized, okay, there's going to be a chapter 2 here. I need to get back to the U.S. And that was pretty hard to plan out. Did manage to get from Cancun to New Orleans and then do a round 2 and chase it in Louisiana. And, you know, as I was chasing that one, you know, really broke my heart. I was down very close to, you know, in the southern Louisiana, very close to where Laura had hit. And, you know, you could see the scars from Laura, you know, like you could see all the houses with blue tarps. You could see the debris piles. You could see, you know, houses with the sides off or with walls cracked open. And no, it really just, man, it like broke your heart. You're like, oh God, do these people have to go through this again? And as you were just saying, Bill, it was the theme of the year that certain areas got hit again and again. You know, Nicaragua just got 2 hurricanes. The Yucatan, you know, had Tropical Storm Gamma, which was almost a hurricane, and then it had Delta, and then of course it had Zeta, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and then of course Louisiana was the other hotspot. I mean, Louisiana just got hit again and again, and there's something really cruel about that. Fortunately, you know, Delta was not as strong as Laura, but it, you know, it had some serious impact down there.
Wow, and I guess your last one to capture was. Zeta, did you do an instant replay? Did you do Mexico, US on that one also?
Oh man, that was a weird chase because yeah, it was like Groundhog Day. I felt like I was stuck in, it was like, you know, when you're sick and you have a fever and you have like some kind of repetitive dream that just like the same thing keeps happening. Like that was Zeta. It was like, and what made it even worse was I think that the flights that I think the flight itinerary by coincidence ended up being the same for Zeta as it was for Delta. So I flew in at the same times of day with the same connections, and both hurricanes came ashore at night. So it literally was like this freaky replay. And I just was like, I was like almost like getting the experiences confused. I'm like, I was having like deja vu the whole time. It was really weird. Zeta was weird because the you know, you expect generally the Yucatan gets the monster impact and then the US gets sloppy seconds, and this was the opposite. Zeta just kind of never really came together, and it hit the Yucatan. It was a category 1. It was not a well-formed system there. I got in the eye, I collected some data, but it was pretty much a dud, which I was very happy about because, the Yucatan had just been hit and smashed pretty good by Delta. So the last thing they needed was another bad impact. I was really happy. You got off very easy in getting them confused in Zeta. Literally, I'm getting confused. The Greek names in particular, they all rhyme. Like they just become this like blur in my head. So that was really good news. So then I raced back to the US and I had very little time. Unlike Delta, Zeta moved very fast across the Gulf. So I had very little time to get from Cancun to the Gulf Coast. There was like basically 24 hours to figure it out. Because New Orleans was in the firing line, I couldn't fly into New Orleans. Or I didn't want to risk it. I was worried about the New Orleans landing being canceled. So I decided to play it safe, I guess. And I flew into Atlanta and then jumped in a car and drove overnight from Atlanta back home to base St. Louis, Mississippi, because it looked like it was going to be in the firing line. And crazy enough, the season finale for what I call Operation Deep South, my whole summer and fall down here, I call it Operation Deep South, my living down here and hunting hurricanes. But the finale of Operation Deep South, that final impact, I wrote it out on the porch of my house in base St. Louis while the right eye wall of that hurricane blasted my town. It was like you couldn't have written a book with a more perfect ending. I mean, not in a good way, but just in like a weird poetic justice way, that the final one just came right to me. And that thing had serious impact. The hurricane was really fast. And if you look on the radar, that intense right eye wall just passed right over base St. Louis. So that the intensity of that eye wall plus the fast forward motion meant that we got raked and this town got banged up good. A lot of fallen trees, a lot of damaged roofs. I mean, just this place really got clobbered. And it passed quickly. The worst of it lasted about 40 minutes, but it was intense. A house across the street from mine got crushed by a falling tree. I talked to another family across the street, and they said at the height of the storm that the front of their house was starting to bend inward, and they were riding it out with their kids in a small interior hallway. It was really stronger than I think a lot of people in Bay St. Louis were expecting. Keep in mind, October 28th is really late for a hurricane in Mississippi. That in itself made it weird. And then after it passed, there was the aftermath that I had to sort of live through, which was an interesting experience for me. This is the first time I've actually lived through a hurricane aftermath since I was 15. Like not having power, the cleanup, all that, and so that was an experience for me to kind of just not just sort of get in and get out, but just experience it like the residents. I was a resident, living without power, cleaning up, the lines, for base necessities and everything. So that was it was an interesting way to round out the chase season.
Wow. Before we run out of time, Tim, you've got some questions for Mr. Josh?
We've got some coming in from online, Josh, and a lot of little hearts that fly across the screen as you're making comments. So people are enjoying what you're saying. So we appreciate that. Marcel's asked a number of questions, so I'll try to get it all down to one. He wants to know if you're thinking of writing a book. What future projects are you thinking of doing? Keeping it hardcore chasing or maybe something different?
No, it's a great question. And, folks, I get asked about a book a lot and, I never considered it, but enough people have asked me about it that I'm thinking, I'm starting to think about it a little bit because I do, as folks who follow me online know, I do like to write. I am a writer. I like to describe my experiences, not just with video, but I do like to describe kind of the experience of it. So it's something I'm starting to toy with. And also a lot of people also ask me about my TV series, Hurricane Man, and we are trying to resurrect it for season 2. We were actually close to having a deal in place, and then the pandemic just kind of threw that off, just like it threw off so many, business deals. But we are thinking, hopefully, to have Hurricane Man season 2 going again this coming season, with me based in Mississippi. We're working on putting that together, and that would obviously be very cool. I'd like to have that going again.
Did you give any thoughts to going to chase Iota, to going down to Nicaragua, Honduras?
Oh, great question, man. Great question, because I wrestled with it, So I do a lot of research on like I'm always looking for exciting new places to chase. And the research when you're looking at chasing new places, whether it be India, Madagascar, wherever it is, it's a lot of research beforehand. I really research these places years in advance, and I also learn the climatology and everything else. And I've been interested in Nicaragua for a while. But if you zoom in on Nicaragua, the Nicaragua coast, especially that northeast part where Iota and Eta both hit, you'll see why I didn't chase those storms. I like to chase storms. I like to hunt down the core, hunt down the eye. And if you look at those places, you can't do that. There's this big town called Puerto Cabezas, but outside of that, you can't adjust. There aren't roads. They're like to get to the next town that's 10 miles down. There's no roads. I don't know how people get to those towns, maybe by boat, but it's not like chasing in the US or in Mexico where you could actually really like just adjust. There's highways. It's not like that up there. And my feeling is if I can't actually hunt down the storm and get in the core, it's not as appealing to me. And, obviously if Puerto Cabezas got a direct hit, it would be cool to be there to document such an important event. But, both these hurricanes, it looks like the eye wall of both Eta and Iota looks like the actual eye wall missed Puerto Cabezas. Now, that town, don't get me wrong, not minimizing the impact. It's still got really heavy impacts, but those would have been frustrating chases because of the lack of roads up there. So I wrestled with it, but after just really assessing the infrastructure and what was there and what was available to chase, I decided not to.
I've got a couple more, Bill, then I'll toss it back to you. But when you made your plans to go to Mississippi, could you ever have imagined that this season was going to turn out the way it was? We knew it was going to be active, but to have the kind of impacts it did and to finish, right where you are, did you have any inkling that it was going to be like this?
Crazy how it turned out. I mean, you think about the typical year, the U.S. gets 1 or 2 hurricanes. For the U.S. to get 6, and then for them all to be right here in the Gulf Coast. No, I mean, and then for the final one to actually a town where I'm living. I mean, it's like, it's crazy. People, some people I believe think I now have like magical powers. Like I've put a hex on the Gulf Coast by my presence. I'm like, they're gonna run me out of here with dishes and pitchforks. I didn't cause it. It's just a coincidence, I swear.
So don't take it personally if we don't want to rent our house in South Texas to you next year, okay?
Oh no, I'm already in bad vibes. I mean, fortunately, the owner of this house he's cool. He's like he's gonna rent it to me next year, so I'll be back in Hurricane House. But I am worried about like people blaming me.
So has any other, as far as you know, any other human being been on the ground in 38 hurricane eyes? I mean, is that
not that I'm aware
like
of.
It's pretty unique?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in Hurricane Man, the BBC, it was a BBC production, UK TV, BBC. They're really in fact checking, so they wanted to know, okay, have I been in more hurricanes than any person in history, at least as far as we know, and based on their fact checking and us checking around, it looks like my 55 hurricane eye walls, or at the time I was in the high 40s at the time that Hurricane Man was made. But that's, I don't know anyone who's been in hurricanes. I'm not aware of anyone past or present who has. So unless I'm told otherwise, I believe it is a record. I mean, obviously someone in the 50 years ago couldn't have done this because, the availability of travel and technological tools for monitoring hurricanes give us a leg up over people historically. And also storm chasing is kind of a modern thing. I know people 50 years ago, or 60 years ago were chasing. I mean, the first hurricane chasers, like for example, Jim Leonard, he started chasing, I think in the 70s. So
it's pretty unique, very definitely unique. And, you look at the hurricane hunters, their planes, they fly into a lot of, but we're talking ground-based, standing in the middle of it is pretty unique.
Exactly. And I want to clarify that I'm talking about on the ground. Of course, some of those hurricane hunters in the planes, I think some of them have been in more, call them pennies. I learned that because I'm friends with the HurricaneCenter, the hurricane hunter guys. They call penetrations pennies, and they actually, like me, they count their pennies, and they actually have badges for numbers of pennies. So yeah, I learned that lingo recently. So So I'm talking about on the ground. I make no claims to having exceeded what they do in the air.
Terrific. Bill, any last questions before we wrap up? It's coming up on 11 o'clock.
Yeah, I can think of one storm that I bet you probably wish you had gotten because I was watching it on the radar from the Philippines. Did you have any thoughts about breaking your rule and trying to fly over there, or were the logistics of the COVID crisis too big?
You're talking about Goni, of course, and which came ashore at a very intense Category 5. I wanted to chase it, but the Philippines, like a lot of those Eastern Asian countries, at least at that time, was, as far as I know, was just shut down, meaning borders closed, meaning there was no decision to be made. You just couldn't enter. But absolutely, in a normal year, I would have been there, because that was one of those examples where, like Super Typhoon Haiyan, you knew from the computer models and from how it looked, you knew days out that it was going to be a major impact. There would have been an easy decision to get out there, and I certainly would have been there. And that was obviously my biggest regret of the year, because that would have been chaseable, and that would have been a tremendous event to document. I came ashore at Catanduanes Island, and I fantasized that I would have been there with my barometers collecting air pressure readings in the eye of that thing, which might have been sub 900, but I'm not going to be greedy. I had a good chase season here.
Good. Yeah. When I saw the pictures of the damaged radar and the totally denuded forest there on that island, that was impressive.
Yeah, what was weird about that hurricane, though, typhoon, was the initial impact in Catanduanes Island was, very intense. I mean, they have to assess it, but it was way up there. But that thing fell apart like really fast. The second landfall, it was nowhere near as strong, and it just turned into scrambled eggs about halfway through the Philippines. It did not. By the time it got to Metro Manila, it wasn't even a typhoon. I've never seen a typhoon fall apart so fast crossing the Philippines, or something weird how fast it just unraveled.
Yeah. Well, Josh, we really appreciate living hurricanes vicariously through your adventures. I hope for many more successful years. Really enjoyed chatting with you today.
Thank you very much. It is always great to talk to you guys. And I love the National Tropical Weather Conference. It's my favorite conference, and it's fun to do this. I don't want to say off-season appearance because it's in season, but off-season for the conference. And I'm looking forward to April, which I hope the hurricane gods and the COVID gods will allow us to do in person.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Again, we appreciate it. And we do hope to see you in April in person on South Padre Island, and not in August on South Padre Island where you're chasing something. We'd like to see you in that off season. That's a good thing for all of us. So Josh, we appreciate it. Bill, as always, great job. Great questions, great insight. And we appreciate that as well. I've still got a list of about 40 questions, so we'll have to save those for next time, because fascinating conversation. Once again, thanks to our sponsors, Plylocks, Hurricane Clips. We appreciate all you do, USAA, and the South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau. And again, we hope to be there in April in some form or another. Alex, we got a couple more good shows coming up before the end of the hurricane season. We're almost there.
We're almost there. Absolutely almost there, Tim. And of course, we're going to be talking with some really good folks. We've got Austin Anderson yet, and we're taking a break next week for Thanksgiving, and Austin will be with us, and we've got a few more programs we've set up with the National Hurricane Center to really say, hey, we're going to do a big wrap-up of what's going on for the hurricane season. That's coming up in January. So, Josh, again, thanks so much for being with us today. It's always great to hear you and to see you and to talk with you and to learn about all those interesting little tidbits during your adventures.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Thanks again. Join us a week after next for our next program. All right. We're in the close.